Why, yes, we did indeed start the fire. Hey everyone, Bront CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we're here talking about the Ice Golem, specifically the Hard Ice Golem, Tainted Clysis. So the Hard Ice Golem is one of the more annoying dungeons in Raid. It's not necessarily difficult to beat, it is, however, often difficult to get a team that is 100% or nearly 100%. And that's still partially because of the mechanics of the boss. The boss hits very hard with the retribution. It gets particularly hard hitting towards the top. But there's a lot to like about the Ice Golem as well, specifically because of some of the buffs that Polarium has done. Ice Golem has four really good sets. Retaliation is a great set. It's a two-piece retaliation set. Basically lets you counterattack with a two-piece at a 15%. It's not necessarily super top tier or super meta because there are other pieces you often do want on champions, but it's a good filler set, especially if you're doing four-piece Savage. You could certainly do two-piece retaliation on a champion. Sometimes you really need the counterattacks depending on the build, so retaliation can be good. And so it could even be a six-piece set for 45% chance to counterattack. So overall, retaliation's a decent set. Reflex is one of the original reset skill stuff. Gives you a 40% chance to drop the cooldown on a skill by one turn. Very good for champions that you can't necessarily get into Relentless gear, but you want to drop the cooldowns down. Plus, it's also good for champions that you need the cooldowns to drop occasionally, but you can't have them do it by taking an extra turn. Some tuned teams just can't deal with the extra turn very well, while they can, on the other hand, deal with a champion in Reflex gear. Reflex, very worthwhile. Cursed gear is a 50% chance to land Hex in a four-piece set. Hex is very good for Hydra. It's actually not too bad for general content as well, although honestly it's mostly good for wave-based content, and even then it's a little limited. And Provoke is a decent chance to provoke, can be very useful in Doom Tower control waves, and again, very useful to put in some of the AoE champions or Hydra as well. So all four of those are great endgame sets. Unfortunately, Ice Golem also has four of the worst sets that you can get. The life set is a very, very basic set. It's one of these last four are actually part of the campaign sets that you can get. Life set, not particularly great. There's so many other sets that do what Life Says does, but better. Same with the offense set, same with the defense set. Although, actually, to be fair, defense set doesn't have anything else that does quite what it does, but there's several that are close. And then crit rate, well, eventually when you get better gear, you're good enough at getting crit rate that you don't need crit rate gear. You want crit damage gear, or you want Savage or something else like that. So they're okay sets early, but they're not great sets long term. And finally, resistance. Resistance is a weird place in the meta. Resistance is a good set overall if you count needing high resistance. The problem is in Arena, you want Stone Skin over Resistance. You still also want the Resistance as well, but you get that in Stone Skin. You get Resistance out of Protection. Even a one-piece set gives you some decent resistance. You can get some resistance out of Supersonic. So there are sets that give you almost as much or more resistance than Resistance set that are better in the end game. On the other hand, if you need the resistance, it's not the worst set to give, but it's a very niche set. You need resistance on any piece you're ever going to keep from resistance, at least once you're keeping specific sets for specific purposes. You also need speed on them because you generally are not going to have a super slow high resistance champion, and if you are, you're probably building them in Stone Skin anyway. So as far as the sets go, four very good sets, four bad sets, and a meh set. So the stats per floor, let's break this down pretty quickly. Floors 2 and 1, pretty similar to what you've got on the normal dungeon. Floor 6, he starts to speed up a little bit, getting up to 150 speed. Every floor after that, he gets up to another 25 speed and about another 10 to 15 resistance and accuracy. So you see this floor 8 stats and the floor 10 stats. As far as what floor to farm here, I've listed 2, 6, and 10 because those are the void floors. Those are usually your pretty nice ones to farm. However, with Ice Golem, there's reasons to farm 9, 5, 7, whatever version you have. Specifically, you might farm 9 versus 10 if you're using a lot of magic champions, because then the weak hits might give you a little extra bonus and a little bit extra survivability that might turn a 1% or 2% failure rate into a 0% failure rate, or at least drop it into the less than half a percent. Um, Same with floor 5 versus floor 6. So there's reasons to drop down a little bit. But in general, these stats will give you a guide on what you're worried about. But the thing you're really worried about with the Ice Golem is this Frozen Reckoning that we've got right over here. Frozen Reckoning is the counterattack that he does when he gets low on HP. So when you do enough damage to get him to 80%, enough damage when you get him to 60%, enough damage when you get him to 45%, 30%, and 15%, he will revive his minions if they're dead. If they're not dead, he will ignore a bunch of extra defense and possibly freeze you and does a lot of damage. So ideally, if you're going to go through these Frozen Reckonings, you want to kill the minions quickly. If you're going to try to prevent the Frozen Reckonings from happening, and you do that against the hard Ice Golem with burns, then you're hopefully not triggering any of those or only triggering one of them so you can survive. That's where some of the randomness comes in with this boss, because sometimes you just can't control when you hit a threshold because something happens. That's why if you're using a solo champ, like some of the strategies I'm going to recommend, you don't want War Master on them. You don't want extra damage to be done. You want to actually lower the crit rate. You want to lower the crit damage. You want to be very careful how you hit the boss so that you don't go about triggering one of these reckonings or trigger too many of them. So let's go take a look at, I'm going to show you my team. I have a Artak soloing the boss, which is a very difficult build to pull off, but I'll show you some of the theories on it for floor 10. But we'll certainly talk about what other champions you could use and what you might be looking for in stats if you're using some of those other champions. So here's my team for stage 10. It's fairly quick. It happens in about a minute, minute and a half. Um, I've got a Seer Wave Clear team, nothing particularly exciting. I've got Padrig leading the charge because he gives additional speed, which is very good for a solo champion. Otherwise, Artek is the star of the show. Let's go take a look and see how Artek is built, because that's really the most important part of this. All right, so here are the Artek net stats, and I wanted to show them here so I can show you what I've got specifically in Ice Golem's Peak. As you see, I've got him at 94k HP. I've got 3.5k defense. The attack really doesn't matter. I've got him at 267 speed. You really need him to be above 250 speed, and there's some other tricks to get him higher as well, which I'll show you in the masteries. The resistance is super important, so I got him above the 450 resistance, and I got him above the 450 accuracy I'm looking for. The area bonuses really did help out with that. Those are all level 5, I believe. So that gives us a lot of easy stats to hit, given this is still a very intensive. Going back in here, the other thing that you need for this is he does need a blood shield ring. He does need to be in 4-piece regeneration gear and 2-piece immortal gear, because we need all the healing we can get. Why is this blood shield ring important? Because the star of the show here is actually this emergency heal blessing. Emergency heal, whenever the shield buff is placed that expires or removed or is broken by an enemy attack, it heals them some percentage. So basically, we are getting an extra 6% heal per turn, and you really need this to be ideally at 3. Level 1 probably will work. Maybe, depending on how good your stats are, you might need to have a bit higher defense. You might need to have a bit higher HP as well. Definitely with the 3-star, that helps quite a bit. If you get it up to a 5-star, you're in great shape, and the 6-star makes this absolutely a breeze, because 15% is a lot. That's the equivalent of getting a second regeneration set on there. Now, to be fair, this is the equivalent of 2 additional immortal sets, so that's still a very, very good heal. And this is just 1 additional immortal set. Again, good heal, worth looking into. As far as masteries are concerned, and this is where I mentioned that masteries can be important to getting extra speed. Obviously, Lure of Steel helps give you additional stats for things like I've got I think I've got either a stone skin or a protection amulet on him, so that's little extra stats from there, not a lot. You also get a little bit of HP extra from the immortal set. because you get 15% bonus there plus an additional 15, so it's 1.5%. Not a lot. If you don't get that, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it helps flow to what else we're looking for as well. Master Hexer is great because that means the burns might go on for 3 turns instead of 2 turns, given he ignites the burns as well. The longer the burns can stay on, the better. Charge Focus, that's not what I was looking for. Arcane Celerity, here we go. This is 30% chance of increasing the turn meter by 10% when a debuff cast by this champion expires. Since he's igniting his own burns, and the burns are ideally going off anyway, he should be pushing his own turn meter up by, ideally, this hits once at every 3 to 4 turn-offs of the burn. Ideally, he's getting an extra 10% once every 2 or 3 turns. Extra speed for each dead ally. This is up to 24 additional speed he could be getting. Ideally, in this setup, most of the other allies are dying, so that's going to be an additional 24 speed. We've got the aura for an additional 25 speed, and then finally, one of the tricks of some of these type of solo champions is Oppressor. Every time an active debuff is cast by this champion, it fills the rate, stacks up to 10%. He is constantly getting an additional 10% turn meter fill on top of everything else because he's constantly throwing debuffs up there. So this lets him go again and again and again. So even with that 260 speed that I showed him with all of these extra speed buffs and then some of the extra turn meter, he's generally going 2-to-1 to the boss, which is great because that gives him a ton of healing. And then he's igniting things and getting the burns out more, and that's overall why it's so fast. So let's go take a look at the run, and since this run is pretty fast, I'm just going to run through it. So we've got a pretty standard seer team where we get the first wave, and I've got his burns and everything else but his A1 turned off for Artak before we get to the boss. And then at the boss, he's doing his A3 first to get the burns out, his A2 to then ignite the burns, and then his A1 whenever he's not doing one of the other skills. So, and from here, I've got everything else turned off other than A1s for the most part, other than I do have Seer doing her A2 on occasion. And hopefully these guys get knocked off pretty quickly, but you can see we got the burns out there. It looks like Clysis doesn't have his burn on right now, or we ignited him, but that's fine. Almost got everyone down. Podrek's nice because he's increasing the cooldown, so we're getting more burns out every once in a while. That can help, and the increased speed doesn't hurt to start off with as well. So now Artak is solo, and he's taking 2 turns to the bosses. I actually just took 3 turns to the bosses one, so we're doing very good. We're not triggering the retribution. One of the advantages of having Lydia here, if you trigger the retribution and the boss's minions have died, is Lydia will revive herself instead, so that can keep the minions down a little bit, so that can help. You know what? No, let's not cut that out, because this is the problem with the boss. This is a nearly 100% team, but every once in a while, he can get lucky. So a lot of these teams, you're just kind of playing the edge, and you got to figure out how much you want to play the edge versus how you're looking for a 100% team. So let's rerun that again. All right, so we're at the boss again, and we're going through the motions here. Got Artak getting those burns out. Everyone's dying pretty quickly. That's good. So Artak hopefully should start popping off here pretty quickly, especially once Podrick passes away. Awesome. So now we just kind of get those burns out. And the reason the minions, it's nice to keep the minions live, is the minions allow you to get additional burn damage. So when he does his burn ignition, he's doing damage to the main boss for 3 burns. And that's generally not triggering the retribution. So that is part of why we're looking for the burns. And that's part of why the burns are better. You also don't want things like your War Master, because War Master will cause the boss to do more attributive strikes. And there we go, minute 15 through the boss. I've certainly done a little bit better, but overall, we're under 60 turns. We're under a minute and a half. All in all, very good run. If you don't have an Artek that can solo, and again, you even looked at mine has pretty nuts stats, and he still died because of retribution. There are other options. First of all, you can certainly run floor 9 instead of floor 10. If you don't have all of these champions, you don't have a Podrick, for example, to get the extra speed, then, maybe you live with slightly slower speed. Maybe the speed isn't quite as important, so you're doing okay with a different champion as well. There are other champions that can certainly help if you're struggling to solo with Artak. For example, you can duo the boss with Artak and someone like an Oella. Oella is great because Oella gives an increased resistance on her A3, which is a 2-turn cooldown, but then her A2 will then extend all buffs by 1 turn. So she keeps the increased resistance up 100% of the time. And she's got a big chunky heal. Well, in the lead also adds an additional 60 resistance with her aura. So while in the lead, using her A3 and then her A2, you've got a lot less stat requirements on Artak as far as the resistance is concerned. In fact, you can go as low as 230 resistance, I believe. That gets you to 290. An additional 50% on that gets you over 430. If you want to be safe, go to 300 resistance. But again, you've got the aura as well, a plus 60. So if you got 240, you're good to go. Another option for another support you can certainly use with Artek, you could use another burn champion to maybe just have a better chance out there. Someone like Walking Tomb Drag is great. He's easy to build because he's got an irresistible burn. He can, as a duo champion, he can provide the HP balancing, which means that if he's high on HP and somebody else is low, they'll balance with each other, so they'll get the highest HP. He does ignite on his A1, although it's only an A1 ignite, so it's not quite as good. Drang can also solo for himself if you don't have an Artek for some reason. Either you weren't around when the logins hit, or you just didn't get him for some other reason. Or you started afterwards. That can happen too. You've got Crypt King Grawl, who could be an interesting option as well. One of the things that he does is, in addition to burns, he has irresistible burns and freezes on champions that are burning. So he could freeze the minions, which can alleviate some of the damage you have to take. Plus the minions, and the reason you need resistance is the minions will throw out block healing. So if you're going to try to solo the boss, you can't have block healing get thrown on you. So that's another option, Crypt King Grawl. He's also got an accuracy aura as well, so he can be an option as well. He is squishier than a Drang or a Artek, so I would be a little weary about using him as the pure solo champion. So maybe you might want to have him run with an Oella or something like that. Other champions that can be an option, Sulfurion will put out burns and activate his burns, as well as provide a bunch of extra healing. So he could certainly solo, or he could duo this with an Artak as well, or you could use other champions that ignite burns with a Sulfurion as well. And then finally, somebody else capable of possibly soloing this as well, Tila, or possibly helping as well. Tila places burns. She has a burn extension. She can put Hex out there, which can add a little extra damage for the burns as well, although you got to be careful with the Hex because that can trigger the Retribution. And then she also offers some continuous healing as well. So she offers a bunch of extra healing as well on her kit. So Tila can actually be very good for the Ice Golem stage. You're not able to get to 10. Again, you can take a slower team, go towards 6. Maybe you go with a 9 because Artek and Tila and Crypt King are all magic. So they're better against 9, which is the Spirit Champion. You can use Drang. You could use Drang against floor 8. If not, floor 10 is too much for you. He's Spirit, and floor 8 is Force. Finally, one of the other fun options, in addition to something like a good healer and cleanser, like an Elva, a Wythier, a Siphi, or a Doom Priest. And in general, if you're looking to speed run this, you're going to want to turn off their revive when they're against the boss. Obviously, Siphi gives you some block debuffs as well, which is nice, and increased speed. So does Elva. Elva gives you the additional cleanse. So Elva can actually be better than Siphi here, and she gives you a speed aura as well, so that's great. Wythier does not have a revive, so you don't need to bother turning it off, and she brings a cleanse and tons of healing, so she can be great. And she doesn't really attack that much, so that's also great as well. Doom Priest is another good option as well. It's an epic, but Doom Priest does some of the cleansing, and since you don't have a lot of debuffs, Doom Priest's got a good chance of taking off any debuffs if you're struggling to resist stuff, and offers just a little bit of extra healing, and doesn't do much damage or much of anything else, honestly. So Doom Priest is actually a pretty good option for you if you're looking for some support here. The last one, which I think is actually kind of an interesting option, Tugron, who's the Void Ogryn. He has a passive where as skills activate, people's max HP increases. So if you put Togron in a team with Artak, Artak's max HP starts to increase. While he'll do a little bit more damage with it, it also means he'll be able to take a little bit more damage, up to 50%. So 50% of, again, mine was at 95k HP. That's another 45, 50k HP. You're talking 140,000 HP. That's pretty impressive, and you're going to have trouble dealing with that. Plus, you're going to get a lot of extra healing. Plus, since these hits by the boss are not max HP hits, you're not actually worried about increasing your max HP. There's a couple of champions you could use against the boss, and a couple different ways you can go about it. Looking at the speeds, obviously, you may not want to go for 10. 10 is ideally the best one to farm, but there's nothing wrong with farming hard 6. There's nothing wrong with farming hard 2. There's nothing wrong with farming any of the hard floors. If you're farming hard 1, then maybe I might go to 25 or 24, stick with the normal stuff. But honestly, once you're farming at least hard 2, if you're doing it safely and you're doing it effectively, then that's great. And if one of these champions or some of these strategies help, then that's great. So if you have any comments, questions, suggestions for things that I might have missed, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Please like and subscribe if you found this interesting. Definitely appreciate it and help growing the channel. Otherwise, till next time, I'm Bront CatHerder.